I'm going to do something different. I want to read a text that I got from a parent requesting us to cover something specific on this podcast. And what he said was, I can say that the biggest question mark is how life is for a high schooler that goes to the minors instead of signs out of college. What to expect and things to know.
Grew up in a small town in upstate New York. As a young player, I knew I was talented, but growing up in a small town, you don't really know, like, am I just talented locally or am I talented, on a national stage? I think like freshman year, went down to Georgia and got the opportunity to play in front of colleges and pretty quickly started getting reached out.
All right, so I'm going to do something different in this podcast, and I want everybody who's a fan and who's listening to kind of, pick up on this, because as we go forward into the future of this podcast, what I really want to make sure that I'm doing personally is I'm delivering information that a lot of these families and these parents ultimately want to know. So in the spirit of that, the very first time I'm going to do this, so I want to read a text that I got from a parent requesting us to cover something specific on this podcast. And what he said was, I can say that the biggest question mark is how life is for a high schooler that goes to the minors instead of signs out of college. What to expect and things to know. He references his son, Spencer. Spencer lives in a smaller town. No one around here in recent years has went on to the draft. So there's really no real resources for him. Guys around here played 30 years ago, which we know is a very different way now. So today on the podcast, I have Dylan Manwaring. Dylan, thank you for joining us. As an intro, so you obviously play professional baseball. Currently, you work for us now at Align Sports. So I want to kind of dive into your experience in baseball. But before that, can you share with everybody a little bit about, like, what was your childhood like? You obviously grew up around the game. Can you walk people through kind of as a kid growing up around the game, what that was like, and why did you grow up around the game?
Yeah, it's a lot, similar to the text. Grew up in a small town in upstate New York. And like this player, it was pretty uncommon for guys in that area to, one, go play at, major universities and two, get the opportunity to play pro ball out of high school. And there's been there's a guy that ended up the year after me, went on to play pro ball. So kind of started something. And I think now with, how travel baseball has exploded, it's given kids from all over the country the ability to get seen by, college recruiting coordinators and professional scouts. So to kind of dive into my story, I grew up in Scottsdale, Arizona, which is definitely more of a baseball hotbed
for sure,
rather than upstate New York. But my dad played in the big leagues for 12 years. So, when he retired, we were in Scottsdale, and then he moved us to this small town in upstate New York. And it was, totally a change of pace for sure. But it was a great experience. I played for a great high school program. My coach was awesome. So kind of going through that process, definitely as a young player, I knew I was talented. But growing up in a small town, you don't really know, like, sure, all right, am I just talented locally or am I talented, on a national stage?
Right.
So as I got introduced to, Perfect Game and all the events around the country, I got to see pretty early on, I think like freshman year, I started going to events and went down to Georgia and got the opportunity to play in front of colleges and pretty quickly started getting reached out. So that kind of put in my mind at, 14, 15 years old, like, I am as good as I think I am.
Right.
And as that, progressed, got to, commit to a college. And then as high school, got to my junior, senior year, got into the more major league scouting events and got that opportunity.
Which we're going to dive into, but not yet. Yeah. So I want to step back and I want to brag on your dad a little bit, because you just kind of casually passed through my dad played in the big leagues for 12 seasons.
Yeah.
So your dad won the Gold Glove. Yeah. What else can you tell us about your dad? He obviously played for the Giants at one point, who had some pretty successful teammates.
Yeah.
So growing up as a kid in that environment, like, what was that like?
No, yeah, he was a guy. He got drafted out of high school, turned it down, went to Coastal Carolina. And at that time, Coastal Carolina was an NAIA school. So it just really shows, like, if you can play, like, they're going to find you. Get drafted in the second round. I think Matt Williams was the number one pick that year for them. Made it to the big leagues pretty quickly. I think he spent like 2 seasons in the minor leagues. And then obviously, like, the growing pains of getting to the big leagues and staying in the big leagues. So, it was back and forth a little bit, and then kind of, got there and stayed for 10 plus years and ended up winning the Gold Glove in 1993. But yeah, playing with guys like Will Clark, Matt Williams, Barry Bonds.
Right.
And then played with, got traded at the deadline, played with the Astros, Biggio, Bagwell.
How old were you during your dad's last season?
Yeah, so I was like 7, 8 years old.
Right. Okay. So you weren't playing travel baseball when your dad's in the big leagues, I guess.
No. And yeah, early in his career, like I was so little that it didn't really I didn't understand what was going on.
Right.
But when he finished up with the Rockies, he had a 3-year deal with the Rockies. And that was kind of when I started to grasp this is the major leagues. And, I got to experience the travel and the behind the scenes, going on the field for BP. I got to sit in the dugout a few times.
Yeah.
So really got an understanding of what Major League Baseball was like at a young age. And that kind of is what jump-started my dream of, hey man, I want to do this one day.
Did you think, obviously you're watching your dad play at the highest level. Did you, as you were watching him, feel like, oh man, if he can do it, I'm his son, obviously I can do it. Did that give you added confidence?
Yeah, I think to a certain extent. And, I think he's really funny. He'll say oh, I wasn't talented. I just, had this inner want in myself that I could go, had a football mentality where I could go beat the guy across from me. And that's kind of what drove him. And that's kind of was his whole career was hey, he had to prove every year that he was the guy. And he was so good defensively. Winning a Gold Glove, you're obviously pretty talented. With the bat, I always give him a hard time. I was like, hey man, if you you passed me down your hitting genes. And that was kind of the story of my career, man. I had some physical tools, could impact the baseball in BP and had a really strong arm.
You're a 5 o'clock hitter.
Exactly, dude. So, I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit later on kind of that jump from high school, but that's just kind of, one giving him a hard time. And
yes, you brought something up that's interesting. So I just had Kurt Suzuki on the podcast, as obviously you're aware of. And Kurt said something interesting too. He's like, look, I wasn't Mike Trout. I wasn't Juan Soto. Every single year I had to prove to not only myself, but to everybody else that I was good enough to stay in the big leagues.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of a common theme for guys who have spent multiple years in the big leagues is if you're not kind of the prototypical superstar, you're grinding every year to show that you deserve to be back.
Yeah.
And so your dad was somebody who, he obviously had that mentality. He was a talented guy too, though. He won the Gold Glove.
Yeah.
So he certainly had his own abilities. But okay, so as we go to you now, more specifically, so you were a senior in 2012 and 13, graduate in 2013.
Yeah.
Walk everybody through. So you had been playing travel baseball. You obviously went to the summer before your senior year, went to all the big events. I know you were at the area code games.
Yeah.
Tell everybody what that summer was like. And at that point in the summer, did you have a sense of oh, I'm going to be a college guy or I'm going to sign? Did you think that way yet?
No, I think and I think most of these kids, even the ones we, deal with and advise, I think every kid wants to be a big leaguer. So, when it's in front of you and it's hey, if I go perform really well at these events this summer, I got a chance to be in a good spot, come spring. So yeah, in my mind, knowing you look up in the stands and there's, 150, 200 scouts, you're oh man, I got to do it today. I got to show these guys that I can really play because I want to be that guy on draft night that gets his name called. So yeah, that's really where it jump started because, you get through the college recruiting process and that was when you're 14 years old, you're hey, I want to play at a major university. I want to play in the ACC, SEC, Big 12, whatever it is.
Real fast, let's pause.
Yeah.
So the difference with today, obviously, is players cannot speak to colleges as early as they could when you played. So at what age were you when you committed to college?
After my freshman year of high school, I played that. That was my first introduction into perfect game in the events. And I ended up committing to Wake Forest that fall of my sophomore year of high school.
Got it. So now we're a couple years later. So that decision has already been made. It is now behind you. And now you're in the summer going into your senior year.
Yes, exactly.
Got it. What was the biggest event for you that summer?
I would say probably area codes. East Coast Pro, honestly, was a phenomenal event. And it was really cool because, you got to stay with a roommate. You got a little introduction into what pro ball would be like. But area codes was cool because it was oh, you fly to LA, and it was at, it's returned to Long Beach now. And I know it was in San Diego for a little bit. My year was in Long Beach. So, that was cool to go play out in California and play against all these, top players from every region. But so I would say that, but East Coast Pro is, neck and neck with it.
Well, and the nice thing for anybody who's listening who's never heard of East Coast Pro or never heard of area code games. So obviously the difference between the two is East Coast Pro is for everybody primarily in the name on the East Coast, right? And there's some, states in the South and in the Midwest that still are involved. But they do a really good job because obviously, as you said, like you're getting the feel of what it is like. You're living with a roommate. You're doing a bunch of stuff with the team. Obviously, there's a ton of scouts at these games. So you're kind of getting a flavor of like what professional baseball would be like. The difference between that and area codes is more, I would say, national. There are some guys on the East Coast that choose not to go. But the cool thing about area codes and East Coast Pro is every scout and pretty much every scouting director in the entire game are at both of those events. So if you go to those events and perform, obviously it's a huge stage and that could help you in the draft. But I will tell you, there have been plenty of guys who have been drafted as high as number 1 overall who have gone to the East Coast Pro and the area code games and actually struggled. So did you have a good event at both of those or?
I don't remember the East Coast Pro as far as like performance wise. I know I was a two-way guy. So I like pitched the last inning because I was so hard-headed. I was like, I'm not pitching, but they ended up throwing me, like closed out our last game there. And then I know going out to area codes, I performed really well. I was like on their, area code all hitters team for the week. So performed pretty well out there. And that kind of jump-started, the process of after that, things really pick up where, scouts are starting to reach out with questionnaires. They're setting up in-homes for, that fall. So that's when it was like, okay, I kind of checked the box and did what I needed to do at some of these events and jump-started the draft process.
Well, and in 2012 and 2013, so they never had the prospect link. So it was every questionnaire that you received was either in the mail or in an email. So today the difference is they have this prospect link. So you just log in and you essentially have, as many as you possibly get questionnaires that are just lined up waiting for you to sign. So it's all digitized now, which is certainly easier and a much easier way to stay organized. How did you handle those questionnaires? Are you talking to your dad about them? Like, is he helping you? Because obviously, and I don't know if you want to share with the listener, like the questionnaires for a 17, 18-year-old kid can be a little overwhelming, right? They're asking some pretty difficult questions. So how did you handle those questionnaires?
Yeah, for me personally, like, I just like love the game of baseball so much. Like I was in tune with like, even at that age, like when I was 14, 15 years old, like I was reading Baseball America and like reading draft, rankings going in.
Yeah, you were like a baseball rat.
Yeah. So like when this started happening to me and, I was like, oh, I just, sit down and do them. And like, I would get them right away and, fill them out and send them back. I probably leaned on my parents a little bit of like, hey, does this sound okay? But overall, like, would get them out of the way and send them back and kind of, I was just excited about the process.
Right. And the in-home visits.
Yeah.
When did those start for you?
Those must have started like right after Jupiter. I went down to Jupiter, the
Worldwood Bat.
Yeah. Played in that. And then kind of after that, scouts start reaching out, being like, hey, I want to sit down with you and your family. When would be a good time? And so we just kind of figured out like, all right, what makes sense I was a basketball player and ended up not playing my senior year. So I kind of had an open schedule that winter. And yeah, made it pretty easy on the scouts. I had a relationship with a lot of them from just being around them that summer. So they'd come into the house, sit down for, 2 hours, 2.5 hours sometimes. And, they ask you all these questions and try to figure out like, all right, what's this guy all about? Could see my family background was a little different because my dad played in the major league. So like there wasn't really any digging on trying to figure out, kind of the home life there. But yeah, that was a fun process. It's definitely the first time, for the most part, and I think most players' lives, especially, for me at that time, where you're like, oh, I'm an adult now. Like I'm having this business conversation with a major league organization. And you got to be a little buttoned up and figure out, all right, how do I answer these questions correctly and make sure that I'm presenting myself well.
Well, I tell families too, think about it, a 17, 18-year-old kid, this guy's meeting with a major league organization, right? Yeah. You in this instance. And you're, for the most part, like he's asking you questions. He may ask your parents a few questions here and there, but primarily he's wanting to get to know, what makes you tick? What are you all about? At 17 or 18 years old, like 95% of the kids aren't having those kind of conversations for years, right? Maybe when they're graduating from college or they're in a job interview. this is essentially a job interview for you. So it's like, I tell families, like, have some grace with your kid. They're definitely not going to be perfect. And by the way, the team doesn't expect them to be.
Yeah.
I had Mike Wagner on, who's the national scouting director for the New York Yankees. And one of the questions I asked him was, you know, are you expecting perfection when you actually ask these kids in these meetings questions? And he's like, no, I want these kids to be, you know, honest and be themselves.
Yeah.
We understand, like, look, we're scouts. We're having conversations with these families and these players. They've never gone through this before.
Yeah.
So naturally, like, they're going to be a little nervous. They're going to be a little unsure of themselves when they're answering those questions. So it's totally fine. We don't expect anything more. So for the families out there that are listening, you do not need to be perfect. I think that's probably the worst thing you can do is try to be perfect, because it's going to come off as inauthentic, and the scouts are going to see right through it. So you mentioned something, though. You said that you had played basketball prior to your senior year. I want to talk about that for a minute. So what helped you make the decision that you didn't want to play basketball?
Yeah, for me, it was just like, you know, I didn't want to roll an ankle.
So it's health related.
Yeah, I knew I wasn't going to go play in college. Like, I could shoot it a little bit, but like definitely wasn't anything special on a basketball court. I just like doing it to be around friends, staying in shape in the winter. But yeah, once I got to a point where I was like, okay, baseball is like pretty serious for me now. And my high school coach, you know, was a basketball coach as well. And he's like, yeah, I don't want you doing this. Like, the last thing you need is to have a serious injury going into your spring. So kind of shut it down. And, you know, it's hard at first because like your buddies are going to practice, but you're kind of get through it. And it's like, oh, now I get to go hit in the cage a little longer and, you know, spend more time in the weight room and getting ready for baseball. So
it's an interesting topic. Yeah. Because, you know, we've talked to scouts. We've obviously had conversations with even families whose kids play multiple sports. Mm-hmm. And it's something that they struggle with, because I think, you know, it's one thing if the kid was as equally talented in the other sport as they were in baseball. Yeah. It's easy for that kid to say, I want to play. Yeah, yeah. But I think what I like to encourage kids today is like, look, I understand why you chose not to from the health perspective. Like, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, yeah. And if anybody doesn't want to play for that reason, I think that's smart. I'll never fault you for that. Yeah. But I think sometimes when the kids or the families make the decision not to play the second sport, it actually has nothing to do with the health. It has more to do with, well, I think I need to spend more time on the baseball field. I think I need to devote all of my time I possibly can to this, you know, getting ready for the draft. And it's not that that's a bad move. I think every family is unique and different. Make whatever decision you feel like is best for you. But I will tell you that, you know, we've had conversations with teams where they like to see the athleticism in the kids. So in the event that you do play two sports, that could be a good thing. Yeah, now, that doesn't mean, and I want to make this clear, I had a dad reach out to me and he asked me the question. He said, so are you telling me, because you're saying it's a good thing to play two sports, are you telling me it's going to hurt my son if he doesn't? No. No, yeah. Right? It's, hey, you know, if your son only plays one sport, don't go play a second because you think that that's like a value add. So I want to make that clear. But I do think it's an important conversation that we at least touch on here, because these scouts, if you played basketball, like, they probably go scout you on the basketball court, not as a player, but as, hey, what kind of leader is he? What kind of, you know, teammate is he? Yeah. You know, if he misses a shot, how is he responding? Is he, you know, what is his athleticism like? Is he able to run up and down the court? What kind of player is he? Is he an offensive player, a defensive player? Like, they want as much information as possible. Yeah. And so playing multiple sports, that's oftentimes why they want to kind of focus on that stuff, because I think they think there's this overlap, right? Yeah. Okay, so senior year, so we get through the winter. Yeah. Okay, now we're going into the spring season. How are you feeling going into the spring season with kind of the expectation you're having? Are you feeling good? Are you feeling nervous?
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's pretty natural for kids this age to have a little, you know, some nerves going into that spring. You obviously know, like, for the first time in your life, like, hey, there's money on the line for something that I'm doing. So yeah, I had a good enough, you know, summer, and then that a little bit of the fall where I was in a decent spot for the draft, where, hey, if I, you know, showed some teams that I could do things a little more consistently, that I was going to, you know, have a chance to make some money in the draft. And I was a two-way guy. So some teams liked me as a pitcher, and I hated that. Like, I wanted to play every day. So I ended up pitching that spring, but I made it pretty clear to scouts, like, hey, I'm not signing as a pitcher. So Like, you guys can come out and watch me.
And was that you just knowing if you visualize yourself in the big leagues, like you had a bat in your hand, you definitely weren't on the mound?
Yeah. And now looking back, is like having all these now life experiences under my belt, I kind of do regret that decision because I was very talented on the mound and had kind of
Was it your ego a little bit?
Yeah, it was just like, oh, my dad played in the big leagues as an everyday guy, and I just loved the game so much I wanted to play every day.
Yeah.
But mentally, I was way more. I had like a bulldog mentality when I was on the mound. In the batter's box, like, I was kind of one of these guys where it was like, if I had a bad game, I was a perfectionist a little bit, and I would beat myself up. So that's one thing. I kind of wish I would have saw that through and seen what kind of opportunities would have been on the pitching side. But yeah, the spring was pretty good. I had a decent spring. I didn't absolutely dominate. But it was good enough to, consistently have a good pool of scouts there every game.
So area scouts, were you getting cross-checked?
Yeah.
Okay. So for those listening who don't know what I'm talking about, so obviously there's different levels to scouts, really briefly, if I could do this. So there's the area scout, there's obviously the regional cross-checkers, there's the national cross-checkers, there's a scouting director. So obviously, depending on what scouts are there, kind of signals like where you're being considered in the draft.
Yeah.
So do you remember like the highest scouts that came to see you?
No, I couldn't.
So you don't know if they were national guys or regional guys?
And part of that, so like the agent advisor process, I had agents reach out, and my family just kind of decided like, hey, like, we're a baseball family. We know how to operate this. So I went in kind of blind. Just kind of, getting feedback from my high school coach or, talking to scouts directly. And looking back and now being on this side of the business, there is value to that of like, hey, being able to have someone pick up the phone and really get an understanding of like, hey, what were your guys' thoughts of this guy after the summer? What are your guys' thoughts after, the first month or month and a half of the spring season, and getting that feedback. So you can really kind of have a expectation of like, all right, this is how things are going. Instead, it was just like, hey, play the spring. And then once spring ends, now I'm going to have to sift through what are the opportunities out there. And in New York, the season ran so late and the draft was in June. So it was like my high school season ended and the draft's like 10 days later.
Right.
So it happened pretty quickly.
Did you get invited to any pre-draft workouts or anything?
Yeah. So, and I couldn't go to many because if you're still in your high school season,
right,
like I wasn't able to go.
So because the draft was earlier in June, obviously you didn't have the luxury of being able to capitalize on those.
So I remember we lost our last game, and I had got invited to a workout by the Astros and lost our game. And I think the workout was like the next day or 2 days later. And I immediately I think I was on like the bus ride home, and I texted my parents. I was like, I want to go to Houston now. Because I at least wanted to experience that. I knew that was one of the last ones before the draft. Mm-hmm. So I ended up flying down to Houston and got to work out in Minute Maid in front of the Astros. So that was like a really cool experience, hitting BP in a big league stadium and kind of being in that environment. So I at least got to experience that.
So, okay. I want to get back to that. But before we're there, so as the season is progressing, at what point are you starting to get a sense of like, okay, this could happen for me? Like, number one, I want to talk about your mentality. Yeah. Like, at what point are you saying, I think I want to sign?
Yeah.
When does that happen?
I think pretty much the whole year. And that's something that I really regret.
Okay, why? This is important.
Because it was an emotional decision. And we talk with families all the time, like, hey, we have to prepare you so that when the draft day comes, it is very emotional. It's the thing you dreamed about when you were, 5, 6, 7 years old is like, oh, I want to play in the major leagues. So getting drafted is obviously the first step for that. So I had this, belief in my mind of like, all right, I want to play pro ball if I get the opportunity. And I let that kind of, I lost my leverage and was like, hey, if a team gives me an opportunity and I think it's the right one, let's go and do it. And I do regret that because I should have, at least had a better understanding of what I actually wanted as far as like a dollar value and all of that.
Yeah, it sounds like you didn't have, and I don't mean this in a derogatory sense towards your parents because they were trying as best they could.
Yeah.
But you didn't have guidance with someone like walking every step with you saying, all right, look, we're at the halfway point throughout the season. This is what's going to happen in the next 2 weeks. This is what's going to happen in the next 2 months. All right, now look, the scouts want to start talking about signability. What does that mean? How do we come up with what that value is? Yeah. None of that was going on.
No.
Okay.
Like not working on this side of things, it's like, hey, this is a long process and there's a lot of work to do in order to prepare families. And yeah, for us, it was like, my dad made a nice career in the big leagues. And so like financially, it wasn't something of, it wasn't going to be an issue on that side of things. It was mostly just like, hey, what do you want to do? And as a 18-year-old kid, we talk to these kids all the time. Like, yeah, you just want to play baseball every day. You got through the gauntlet of school for, the last 12, 13 years. And you're ready to get into play baseball every day. So, and that was kind of my mindset.
So is Wake reaching out towards the end? Are you like having conversations with them too?
Yeah. So they, the head coach came and watched a game in the spring, had dinner with the family. And what a like phenomenal human being. And that's like, and I have some buddies that ended up playing there and had great experiences. So yeah, looking back at that, and now, you go to college games and stuff and see our guys play, like that environment that you play in college baseball, and college baseball just keeps getting bigger and bigger.
Right.
That's something you don't get in the lower levels of the minor leagues. So, having those relationships with the staff there for, 2-3 years leading up to that point, that was the hardest part because because you don't know how the draft's going to go. So you're trying to be like, hey, no, I'm really excited to come to school. And you're not going to tell them like, hey, I'm going to the draft. Cause like, you don't know at that point if you're actually going to get drafted.
Yeah. You only have so much control over that too.
So you have to manage, those conversations. And it really came down to, kind of the wire, like told the team like, hey, I think I'll sign for that. Get selected. And then kind of, if you tell a guy, hey, draft me, I'm going to sign. Like you can't really go back on that. Like you can, but it's kind of frowned
on.
on.
So let's pause for a moment. Yeah. I want to give these families a sense of what that day is like.
Yeah.
But okay, so let's back up. So we're going into the draft. We've now gotten re-recruited by Wake in a sense.
Yeah.
Head coach came in, told you why, you should probably go to college.
Yep.
So now you are leading up, let's say days before the draft. You've already gone to the Astros workout days before the draft. Are you at any point saying, what should my number be? Should I have a figure where if they don't offer me this, I should go to college? Or were you not even thinking that way?
So I told teams, I was like, hey, if I go in the top 10 rounds, like I'll sign.
Oh, wow.
And we know that's like not the way to do things. So yeah, and it was just the way like, my family decided, and we talk about it now, like me and my parents are like, wow, we handled that really poorly. But that's why it's so important to like, for these families to really look for resources and to be educated on this matter, because it's a whole new world. Like,
when it's changing too. That's the thing that I think people don't realize is every year there are different strategies and tactics that evolve and change throughout the process. And I think, one of the things that we lead with more than anything is really the education behind it, right? It's like meeting with these families going through the draft. And I will tell you that every family, when they go through it for the first time, there's always this expectation of like, I want to know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I want to know on draft day exactly what's going to happen. And the truth of the matter is you can't script it.
No.
And the reason you can't script it is because it's out of your control.
Yeah.
The only team, right, before the draft that knows what they're doing is the team that picks number 1 overall. That's it.
Yeah.
And so once that happens, then the second team gets to figure out, all right, what are we doing based on what, this player that was taken? And there could be assumptions that these subsequent teams are making based on who they think is going to go 1-1. But the reality is that like, they can't figure it out. So all of these teams need to have contingency plans.
Yeah.
And these contingency plans ultimately affect every individual player. So here you are going through the process for the very first time, not knowing anything that's going to happen behind the scenes, telling teams, hey man, I just want to go sign and play pro ball. If you draft me in the top 10 rounds, like we're good to go.
Yeah.
So the draft starts. Who drafts you? Who calls you?
So the Atlanta Braves draft.
So the Braves draft you. So they called you on the phone before the pick.
Yeah.
And they said what? And you don't have to tell us the dollar value, but like...
No, yeah. They called me in like I want to say like the 7th round. And we're like, hey, we're either going to take you next round or the round after.
So you're either going to take in the 8th or the 9th round?
Yeah.
Okay.
And will you sign? And, quickly.
Didn't even tell you a number, really?
Or no, it was like, it was the slot value.
Okay, got it.
And I, talked to my parents and I was like, and it's pretty quick. It's like, hey, give me like 1 minute and I'll call you back. So, decided, they're like, is that what you want to do? And obviously I don't remember this perfectly this day, but and I was like, yeah, I think I want to do this. And, call the scout back and let him know, hey, yeah, I'll sign. So, comes across, get picked, and there you go. And then obviously, a ton of people start texting, calling. My college coaches reached out. Were like, hey, congrats, buddy. Like, enjoy it.
Yeah, they were happy for you. I mean,
yeah.
Obviously bummed out that they didn't get you, but they're good people. Like,
no, exactly. Even after that, we had multiple conversations because it was still like unknown. Like, hey, are you for sure going to sign? And once you start having those conversations, I probably didn't handle it correctly because I was like, yeah, I'm still thinking about it. But I had already told the Braves, like, oh yeah, I'm signing. That's one part I just regret about it is I let it drag out a few days. But I still had the right to tell them, to sleep on it and tell them. So yeah, that was, decided to go play pro ball and went to my graduation and flew out the next day and, go down to Orlando, Florida and in rookie ball and started my career.
Okay, so you show up down in Orlando.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're ecstatic. You've step one of your dream has now been fulfilled.
Yeah.
Now you go into pro ball. What is it like in your first couple of days? Because obviously, again, you have a dad who played in the big league. So he's at least able to provide you, all right, listen, son, this is what to expect.
Yeah.
But even based on what he's told you, how did that meet the realities when you saw it for yourself? Was it close? Was it like, oh man, it's totally different than I ever would have expected? What was that like?
No, it was, it was pretty similar. Like he coached for the Giants for a really long time after he got done playing. I got to experience that growing up, like going to minor league games, sitting in the dugout, being around all the players. So I kind of knew what to expect. But yeah, you're rolling up to, the spring training complex. They obviously have the big stadium there. And it's like, no, you're not going to play there. You're going to go play on these backfields over there. So the first few days, you get your medicals done. And then they slowly, get you rolling with some BP on-field stuff. And then, the season, the Gulf Coast League starts. So you go right into that. And I got off to like a unbelievable start the first week. I was like 9 for 10 or 8 for 10. And I'm like, oh, this is great. Like I'm rolling.
You're going to promote me in like a couple days. Yeah.
And then after that, like, really started struggling. And then you kind of have this, me personally I had this moment like, oh man, like this is tough. Like, can I do this? And so you kind of, and obviously it's baseball. Like you're on top of the world, then you're at a low point. So it's tough as an 18-year-old kid to balance those emotions. And for the most part, like you rarely struggle if you're in a place where you're going to a big school or, getting drafted, like you haven't struggled that much going through your career. So when you feel, getting those moments and it's like, man, I can't buy a hit, this guy's throwing 95, 96. He's, I've never seen a slider that looks like that, at that level. Command's not great. So you're getting balls, up and in, or guys are throwing it off the backstop. So you're like, wow, this is tough. And, you're in Orlando, Florida in July and in August, and it's, 95 degrees with 100% humidity.
Well, and you're playing every single day.
Yeah. You're, playing every day. You're getting in there early, 6:30, 7 a.m., go and do your early work with the, the infield guy, the hitting guy in the cage, take BP. Then it was go into the clubhouse, have your lunch, and then come out for a game. And you're doing that, every day. There was some off days sprinkled in, but it's a lot. And you're, 18 years old. You're playing against guys that just played, college baseball for 3 years. So it's a big jump. Guys, there's some really good stuff. Guys had incredible stuff. The 95, 96, good slider, and command's obviously not great at that level. So that's an adjustment period to get used to that.
Yeah. If you were talking to a high school kid who's, about to make that jump?
Yeah.
What's like the first thing that you would tell them as far as what to expect just from the performance of pitchers? Like if you're a hitter, hey, let me tell you about these pitchers. Like what's one of the first things that you're telling them to be prepared for?
Yeah, you're going to, see, and it's crazy nowadays. We go to these events and there's some really good arms, but these kids are never facing, premium velocity every single at bat. And that's just the case in the minor leagues is like you're facing guys with a good fastball. Typically they have a good second pitch. And then obviously in the lower levels, command's not great. It's pretty bad. So yeah, you have to be kind of ready to hit the fastball. And you obviously, you got to be a guy who really understands the zone. If you are a free swinger, there's very few guys that can be free swingers and get away with that. But yeah, it's an adjustment period, but these kids are so talented that you can handle it, but you just better be ready to deal with the failures of, like, you're going to go 0 for 12. You're going to have, a few games in a row where you can't hit anything. And so you have to come in with this perspective of like, I know I'm going to fail at some point, but that's part of this game. In order to be in the big leagues, I've got to learn how to deal with that failure on a day-to-day basis. Because the guys that are playing every day in the big leagues, those are the guys that figured that out. There's only a few, Mike Trouts, Aaron Judges, those kind of guys.
Right.
The other guys, they're very talented players, but they've kind of, learned the hacks to play every day and be able to compete.
And I think this is such an important message because as athletes, you've had it beat into your head that like you're always just the best no matter where you've been.
Yeah.
So when you get into pro ball, the expectation is like immediate success.
Yeah.
And for some players, when they struggle in pro ball, there starts to become doubt and second guessing.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about that is like Rafael Devers started this season off. I think it was like 0 for 18 with 15 punch outs.
Yeah.
Right. So it still happens in the big leagues. But these players, like the only way you're ever going to learn how to face velocity consistently every single day is when you're facing it. You're never going to just have success against those guys 100% of the time. Like it's going to be an adjustment. But be patient with yourself and know, am I willing to put in the work? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Can I make the adjustment? Okay, yes.
Yeah.
And just stick with it. I think one of the worst things that guys do is they get into pro ball and the second guessing becomes this like contagion where, oh man, now like second guessing is now their way of thinking.
Yeah.
Right? Now they just second guess everything. Am I good enough to be here? It's like, whoa. You've got 10 at-bats. Like slow down, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so very briefly, I want to just, I guess, share a little bit about kind of what happened from that point forward. So obviously, your career doesn't turn out like you had hoped, right? Yeah. You eventually get told, hey, we'd like you to go on the mound, right? You also got told, hey, we want you to go behind the plate and catch because you're dad.
Yeah.
So the career does not unfold the way that you had hoped.
No.
You end up retiring.
Yeah.
You go work for the commissioner's office, and then we got put in touch. You talked to several different agents, and then we brought you on board.
Yeah.
We sit here today. You obviously are an agent now with us. I want you to talk to families now and really answer the question that this one father asked.
Yeah.
If you had to do it over again, would you have made the same decision? What would you have done differently through that process?
Yeah. And I think for me is to seek out an understanding of like, hey, what does it mean to be drafted in this range, out of high school? And hey, there's been guys that, sign out of high school that weren't, first, second, third rounders. But it is a harder path because these scouts are pretty good at their jobs. Like if they don't have you in that range, there's something missing about your game at this, current time. So I just wish I would have thought it through and actually listened to, scouts were pretty honest with me. They're like, hey, we see you in this range as a pitcher. Then we see you in this range as a hitter.
What range did they see you at as a pitcher?
There were some guys that were like, hey, we see you in the third, fourth round for on the mound. And I was just hard-headed and didn't want to believe it. I was just, I had this belief in myself. I was like, oh, I'm going to be a big league hitter. Like, I'm going to be an everyday third baseman. And even, from college coaches to scouts, they made it pretty clear, like, hey man, you have a lot of tools and you have, a big league body, but like you have some refining to do in order to be a guy who's going to be a really good professional player. And I just kind of thought like, oh no, but if I do this every day, I'm going to figure it out. And that's just ignoring kind of the facts at the time. So I wish I would have listened to people more and been like, hey, they're right. As much as I want to go do this right now and play baseball every day, Like, do I just want to play baseball every day, or do I want to look back in 10, 15, 20 years and be like, oh, I was a big league player because I went to college and I developed and learned how to put together a quality at bat. And that was things that I couldn't do for the first 2-3 years of my career.
Well, and one of the things I think could have helped you, and we talked about it a little earlier, obviously, and this isn't meant to be self-serving, but like if you would have had the right advisor, the advisor is able to have conversations with these scouts. And the scouts may have been more comfortable to share information about you hitting. Right. And more or less like, let me just summarize what I could see to be a conversation. Hey, look, I'm just letting you know, for us, Dylan's going to be on the mound. Like, could he hit? Maybe, but we just don't like him there. This kid needs to stop messing around. He needs to get on the bump. If you would have heard from your advisor that 15 teams said that exact same thing, is it possible that you would have said, oh, wait a second, should I be reevaluating this? And maybe the answer is no, because I want to hit. So I'm going to hit regardless. But I think it's having the information that maybe could have helped you formulate a different conclusion. So did you at all make the decision to sign because you did not want to go to school? And I mean, like, you didn't want to go to class. You didn't want to deal with that. Yeah, I mean, it would have been fine. Like, I went back to college after I got done playing. But yeah, I think I just was like, hey, if you want to play in the big leagues, like, why would I not take this opportunity? That's the path to it right now. But thinking about the college side, and hey, I could have went to college and not gotten drafted. Like, doesn't mean I was going to be a big leaguer if I went to college. Right. But when I was in the position of being in pro ball and seeing guys that were drafted out of college, it was a different brand of baseball. Like, hey, saw Austin Riley when he was 18, was on the Braves with him. And this guy I think he struggled like a little bit in, that first like month or two in the minor leagues. And then he gets called up, and I was the third baseman at the time. And he comes up, and, you're in your head, you're like, oh, like, this guy can't be that good. And he takes BP, and it's just like, special. It was unbelievable. He was hitting balls, out the other way with ease. First game, I think he hit like 2 doubles. And right away, I call my parents, and I'm like, yeah, I probably won't be playing third base very much anymore. But yeah, guys like that, like, there are guys that are different. Ozzie Albies was probably one of the most talented baseball players I've ever seen at 16 years old. It was incredible how easy he made the game look. But to, kind of go back to the college side, it doesn't mean I was going to be a big leaguer if I went to college, but I did see the college guys and just how much more prepared they were to be a professional day in and day out, because they have so many at-bats under their belt. Right. In big environments where you're playing in front of 10, 12,000 people, and you're seeing a guy who can command a baseball, who can command multiple pitches, and throw, backwards and counts. And as a high school guy, it's like, for me, it was like, oh, go find a fastball and hit it. Like, there was no understanding of how to hit secondary and really how to put quality at bats together. Yeah, and I think it's important for families to hear that there's no one size fits all, right? For you, maybe it would have been better if you went to college. But maybe it wouldn't have been. Maybe the same outcome would have existed either way. But I do think it's important for families to have advice, for guidance. I do think it's important for families to keep an open mind and to really ask themselves and envision their son, or if their son is listening, to do both paths and like, think about it. Would I enjoy playing pro ball? Obviously, we know the answer for everybody is going to be yes, right? But that doesn't mean that the path should be that you sign out of high school and that you bypass college. I think you really need to think about, what is the environment in college? What are the things that I consider, right? Obviously, the travel in college, depending on the school you go to, is going to be probably a little better than the minor leagues early, right? The food, the environment, all of that stuff, most likely it will be better in college, depending on the school, than it would be in professional baseball. The travel, bus rides versus plane flights, right? Like, those are real things. The coaching is different. I will say that in college today, these teams are starting to incorporate a lot of the data that a lot of these pro teams are doing. So again, it's just get your information and truly think about it in a methodical fashion. Don't wait for the draft to come, and then the night before the draft, ask yourself, like, well, what should I do?
Yeah.
Like these are conversations that should have been had months, weeks before the draft.
Yeah.
Because when draft day comes, as you said before, there's going to be so much energy, so much excitement around this idea of you getting drafted that the first time that you think about what you want to sign for cannot be when that phone rings with an offer.
Yeah.
At that point, it's way too late.
Yeah.
And so I've always encouraged families, have these conversations well in advance and have them so much that when that phone rings, you know without a shadow of a doubt what your answer is. And if it's not what you hope, let's just say it's, for argument's sake, you want $1 million.
Yeah.
And a team calls and they offer you 900. You know when you say no to that $1 million or no to that 900, that you feel good about it.
Yeah.
And you're totally confident going to college and having everything work out the way that it needs to. So, okay. Talk a little bit about, again, now being on this side of things, how has the game changed from the time you were going through it until today?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it's still the same as far as you have all the same perfect game events. But these players are introduced to kind of what's taken over baseball with analytics and understanding, all of the new data and stuff that's come into the game at a really young age. These kids are, whether they're in a hitting facility or a pitching lab, they're kind of, already starting really young to be acclimated to that. And it's really going to help them in the long run because as we see, like on the pro side and college side, like everyone's diving into this stuff. So the younger you're able to grasp this stuff is only going to help you. Because if you go in, like a deer in the headlights, like what is this? It is hard to kind of jump into that and feel comfortable in that environment. So I would say that's the biggest difference with players today is they're a little more advanced. Sure. I think it's the same game. Listen, there's been talented players through the history of this game. So it's not like, oh, we're in the golden age of baseball. But I do think that kids now at a younger age are a little more advanced as far as, just the things they can do. That you see, guys, it used to be like, hey, there's a guy in the draft class that threw 98, 99. Now it feels like, hey, there's multiple guys that are, upper 90s to 100 that are high school kids. And so I think that's probably the biggest difference now, but it's still the same game. And these kids are still, kids at the end of the day.
Right.
They're dealing with the same thing of balancing this social life of, hey, I have my friends at home, but I'm this really, great athlete and, everyone is telling me how great I am. So the biggest advice I can, give to these kids is, hey man, stay kind of grounded because you have still a long way to go, but also, pat yourself on the back and be proud of yourself because, when you get that college scholarship or, you're in the conversation to get drafted, like that's an accomplishment. There's, only a few hundred kids, that are going to have the chance to get drafted. And, there's only probably a few thousand kids that are going to play, college baseball. So, have some grace with yourself. This is a really hard game. Never get too high, never get too low. Try to find that, that even point because the guys that are here, those are the guys that end up playing in the big leagues.
I would, and I hope I'm not out of line by saying this, but
No.
I feel like you were probably somebody when you played in high school, at least through the draft process, you probably put a lot of pressure on yourself.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah. And I think part of it is, and dad wasn't Barry Bonds or Ken Griffey, but like having a dad, that played in the big leagues, you feel this kind of like sense of, oh man, like I'm expected to do that.
Yeah, there's an expectation for sure.
We have the same last name and I'm, playing in all these events and obviously like scouts know the last name. So I did put a lot of pressure on myself of like, and the funny thing is like my dad was the furthest thing from someone who would put almost to a fault. Like he wasn't hard enough on me as I wish he probably was. But it was, but yeah, I was definitely a guy who was really, really beat myself up and just wanted to be like perfect. And you can't in this game.
No, it's, I think everybody, when you're talking about fulfilling a dream at that age, like think about that. Most people, when they fulfill a dream, it's like, oh, 20, 30, 40, even, 50, 60, whatever it is. Yeah. You're fulfilling a dream, one of your dreams, at 17, 18 years old.
Yeah.
Like, that's crazy.
Yeah.
And so I think what unfortunately that does, though, is it leaves you open to one of two things. One is you fulfill that dream, you sign for whatever money that you wanted to sign for, you enter pro ball, and then I've made it, right?
Yeah.
And then you have the difficulty of realizing it's just beginning.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I interviewed Tony Clark on the podcast this past week, and Tony was saying, I was asking him, like, hey, what's the difference that you've seen in the game from the time you played? Because Tony was a big leaguer until today. And he's like, you know what's funny is I've talked to players, I feel like the goals have changed, where when Tony was coming up, he was telling me that a lot of players' goals was, I want to get to the big leagues. And now it's turned into, I want to get drafted.
Yeah.
And he's like, it's so interesting just to see the thought process change where, you're now entering pro ball saying, I've made it. Where before it was like, oh no, this is just now like step one of 100 steps. I got to get good. Now I got to elevate my game.
Yeah.
Right. And so that is something, and I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but I do believe that that's something that exists today.
Yeah.
More than
and I think it's natural, like, to kind of, be in that moment of excitement when you first get drafted. But I was a guy who kind of, I lived in that world of like, oh, I got drafted. I played for the Atlanta Braves. But it like quickly goes away for, I feel like, a majority of guys. I know me personally,
it's like anything in life.
Yeah.
You realize, oh wait, there's still a tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right? You're still just a human being.
Yeah. And you still have to, like, a big issue with me was like, instead of just like living in that moment of like, all right, I'm in rookie ball right now, like in attacking day by day, I got into this mindset of like, all right, all I have to do is like the next spot has to open up in the level above. And like, if I'm playing good, I'm going to get my shot.
You were playing this like mental game of analyzing who's above you.
And I think a lot of players do that.
Sure.
Like it's really easy to get caught up in that because you're just like, oh, I got to get to the next level. And then once you're there, you're not enjoying it. You're like, all right, I got to get to the next level. And hey, I understand that. Like that's common. Like if your goal is to be up there, it's like, all right, how am I going to get there? But the only way you're going to do it in this game is like day by day, bat by bat, pitch by pitch. When you're not focusing on like the moment and the reality that you're living in, you can't have these outside thoughts because it's just dragging away your focus from being able to perform.
No, absolutely. I tell a story often where I was at the Cal League All-Star game. This is when they even had minor league All-Star games 20 years ago. And Billy Beane is giving a speech to all the All-Stars in the Cal League that year. And he asks the players rhetorically, he goes, do you guys really think that if you're a big leaguer, like you're big league caliber, that I don't want you in the big leagues? And what he was referencing is there's this belief, and you kind of mentioned it, which is, oh, I'm big league ready, but they're not calling me up because I'm like blocked, right? Yeah. And he kind of smirked and he laughed. He's like, the best thing you can do, the best thing I want you to do is show me that you're big league ready. Because if it's not going to be with us, and at the time, obviously the Oakland A's, if it's not going to be with us, then some team's going to come trade for you. Yeah. And so it was based on that conversation where I ended up putting together this, what I call like kind of like a blocked survey that I did, where I analyzed all of these players throughout the big leagues who were having success at that point, and what did they do in the minor leagues. And there was a bunch of players, and one was Gary Sanchez. So Gary Sanchez was with the Yankees at the time. He was I think he was a AA, but he was like one of the top 100 prospects in baseball. Yeah. And he then goes to AAA and has like a monster season. And that offseason, the Yankees signed Brian McCann, who was a catcher. Gary Sanchez was a catcher to a 5-year deal. Yeah. And so here's a guy, one of the top prospects in baseball, catching prospect for the Yankees. He had a monster year in AA or AAA. The Yankees sign a guy to essentially block his path to the big leagues. Mm-hmm. That is a perfect example of a guy who could have just folded it up and said, I'm never getting to the big leagues. Instead, he went out and had another big season. The Yankees called him up. They moved Brian McCann to DH. Gary Sanchez at one point was an all-star, still in the big leagues today, having success.
Had a great career,
But it's a perfect example of like the performance will dictate everything. So how do you stay like, between the lines with your thinking of, I just need to focus on what I can do today and not allow all of this noise to get in my way, because it's all meant to just bring you down.
Yeah. Hey, I had people tell me that all the time when I was young. And like, it's funny, we had this conversation in spring training with one of our players. Like, people will tell you things that are right, but when you're 17, 18 years old, you're just like, no, this is my way of doing things. And then you look back and, Now you have some life experiences. You've kind of gone through it and you're like, wow, almost, my dad was right about certain things, coaches were right about certain things. And you kind of, unfortunately, unless you're a guy who's willing to be open to listen, you kind of just have to go through those experiences and fail. And hopefully you get through it. But yeah, you want to rely on the people that are telling you and have gone through it, because they're probably right. Mm-hmm. And I was a guy who just didn't want to listen because I was like, oh, I'll figure out my way. Like, I know what I'm talking about. And you just don't at that age.
Do you think that if you would have, I feel like players when they get into pro ball get so consumed with the game on the field that they kind of lose themselves off the field. They don't really maintain relationships off the field. They kind of go into their own little bubble, right?
Yeah.
And I was talking to a client of ours, and I asked him, I still represent him today, but I represented him out of the draft, and I said the player's name, and I said, hey, what could I have told you? Because this is a guy who took him 10 years to get to the big leagues.
Yeah.
Like, he was grinding through, finally got to the big leagues. He's now in AAA. And I said, what could I have told you as an 18-year-old kid that would have helped you learn the lessons that you just learned?
Yeah.
What could I have told you to, again, to the 18-year-old kid that you would have understood? And he's like, man, I don't know. I got to think about this.
Yeah.
He calls me a couple days later and he says, you know what I think would have helped? If you would have helped me understand that I need to be confident with myself if this game doesn't work out.
Yeah.
Because that would have alleviated so much pressure I put on myself.
Yeah.
Where so many kids go into pro ball and they think, this is life or death.
Yeah.
If I do not get to the big leagues, my life is over.
Yeah.
And that's not the case at all. And so what this player realized is the minute he understood that he will be totally fine if baseball never works out, he started to perform better.
Yeah.
Right? Which makes sense.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that advice would have helped you?
No, yeah. And I kind of experienced that, but it was hadn't put up numbers and it was late in my career. But I because when I was, first coming in, I was like, man, if I don't play in the big leagues, like you said, my life's over. Like, this could be the worst thing that would ever happen to me. And as you start going through the minor leagues, it wasn't that I lost the love for the game, but I started to grow into myself and understand who I was and other things that I enjoyed. And actually my last year pro ball, I ended up applying to a school and started, taking some classes because I knew all right, there's other things I have interest in. I know I personally wanted, I had the college scholarship plan to use. So I was like, hey, I'm gonna dip my feet in this and give it a, go on what this is gonna look like for life after baseball, because I could start seeing the writing on the wall. And that's kind of when, I actually started having probably more fun playing. I didn't put a bunch of pressure on myself.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that I gave up or gave in, but it's hey, I learned some lessons along the way. I wish it would have gone differently, but I've come to peace with, I met some great friends. I got to travel all across the country. I got to compete every night. So that was, my moment where I was like, all right, there's life after baseball. There's something else. And me personally, I know there's guys I played with that once they were done, they're like, I want nothing to do with baseball. And I still do hey, I want to probably get on the business side of baseball, either, in the front office. I didn't really think I wanted to do coaching, but, ended up getting an internship after with the commissioner's office. And then, from there we connected and got on this side of baseball. And this is really kind of my passion now, because I get to give, even though I wasn't a big leaguer, I get, this other perspective of, hey, what professional baseball looks like. And every kid at a young age is excited for this opportunity. So it's trying to give them lessons of, hey, don't do this. Make sure you have this mindset when you're going into things. And hey, man, I know you're struggling right now. Trust me. I've had so many 0 for 4s, it hurts, but have a little grace with yourself and enjoy this. This is part of the game. There's guys at the highest level that are going through the same thing you're going through right now. So don't think that this, period where you can't get a guy out or, you can't find a hit, it's going to end. You're way too talented, but let's try to reel it in and just breathe a little bit.
Yeah. Buddy, this is great.
Yeah, man.
Appreciate you coming on. Kevin, who was the dad that asked me those questions. I hope this was good for you. I hope you learned something. Yeah, man, we'll have to do this again.
That was a fun conversation.
This is like phase one of potentially multiple conversations. So
for sure.
Dill, I appreciate it, buddy.
Yeah.